All right, here we go. This is chapter 5, The Last of the Blind Man. Remember, last we saw Jim, he was hiding under a bridge with most of his mom. The rest of her is hanging out of the bridge. So whatever that means. And the Flint's crew, Captain Flint's former crew, whoever Captain Flint is, we don't know a lot about him yet, except for that Billy, the old sea dog from the first chapter, was his first mate, and these guys were his crew that are coming back because they want Billy's stuff. They think Billy's alive. They had told Billy that he was summoned at 10 o'clock, and it's not 10 o'clock. It's not even close to 10 o'clock. But the blind man had come back to check on things, and the doors were locked, and everything was like shut down. And so that made him suspicious that Billy was maybe running for it. Maybe that was what was going on. So here we have a chapter, and it's called, ominously, chapter 5, The Last of the Blind Man. Okay, so that's the blind man, the last of him. All right, so let's see what that means. Okay, here we go. My curiosity, in a sense, was stronger than my fear, for I could not remain where I was, but crept back to the bank again, whence, sheltering my head behind a bush of broom, I might command the road before our door. By command, he means just be able to watch it. He wanted to see it. I was scarcely in position ere my enemies began to arrive, 7 or 8 of them, running hard, their feet beating out of time along the road, and the man with the lantern some paces in front. 3 men ran together, hand in hand, and I made out, even through the mist, that the middle man of this trio was the blind beggar. The next moment, his voice showed me that I was right. So the blind beggar was running with 2 other guys on his side, holding his hand, so he could run faster. Okay. Down with the door, he cried. Aye, aye, sir, answered 2 or 3, and a rush was made upon the Admiral Benbow, the lantern bearer following, and then I could see them pause and hear speeches passed in a lower key, as if they were surprised to find the door open. But the pause was brief, for the blind man again issued his commands. His voice sounded louder and higher, as if he were afire with eagerness and rage. In, he shouted, and cursed them for their delay. 4 or 5 of them obeyed at once, 2 remaining on the road with the formidable beggar. There was a pause, and then a cry of surprise, and then a voice shouting from the house, Bill's dead! But the blind man swore at them again for their delay. Search him, some of you shirkin' lubbers, and the rest of you aloft and get the chest, he cried. I could hear their feet rattling up our old stairs, so that the house must have shook with it. Promptly afterwards, fresh sounds of astonishment arose. The window of the captain's room was thrown open with a slam and a jingle of broken glass, and a man leaned out into the moonlight, head and shoulders, and addressed the blind beggar on the road below him. Pew! He cried. They've been before us. Someone's turned the chest out alow and aloft. Is it there? Roared Pew. So now we know the blind man's name. His name is Pew. Okay? The money's there. The blind man cursed the money. Flint's fist, I mean, he cried. We don't see it here nohow, returned the man. Here, you below there. Is it on Bill? Cried the blind man again. At that, another fellow, probably him who had remained below to search the captain's body, came to the door of the inn. Bill's been overhauled already, said he. Nothing left. It's these people of the inn. It's that boy. I wish I had put his eyes out, cried the blind man, Pew. There were no time ago. They had the door bolted when I tried it. Scatter, lads, and find 'em. Sure enough, they left their glim here. Glim's a candle, okay, said the fellow from the window. Scatter and find 'em. Rout the house out, reiterated Pew, striking with a stick upon the road. Then there followed a great to-do through all our old inn, heavy feet pounding to and fro, furniture thrown over, doors kicked in, until the very rocks re-echoed, and the men came out again, one after another, on the road, and declared that we were nowhere to be found. And just the same whistle that had alarmed my mother and myself over the dead captain's money was once more clearly audible through the night, but this time twice repeated. So somebody's out in the woods going, whistle, whistle, like a signal. I had thought it to be the blind man's trumpet, so to speak, summoning his crew to the assault, but I now found that it was a signal from the hillside towards the hamlet, and from its effect upon the buccaneers, a signal to warn them of approaching danger. "There's Dirk again," said one. "Twice. We'll have to budge, mates." "Budge, you skulk," cried Pew. "Dirk was a fool and a coward from the first. You wouldn't mind him. They must be close by. They can't be far. You have your hands on it. Scatter and look for them, dogs. Oh, shiver my soul," he cried. "If I had eyes." He's telling them, you got to look for the people of the house. So the boy and his family must have taken the stuff. They can't be far. They were just here. They left their candle lit. You've got to look for them. Where are they? Okay. "Hang it, Pew, we've got the doubloons," grumbled one. "They might have hid the blessed thing," said another. "Take the Georges, Pew, and don't stand here squalling." Squalling was the word for it. Pew's anger rose so high at these objections till at last, his passion completely taking the upper hand, he struck at them right and left in his blindness, and his stick sounded heavily on more than one. So he gets so mad at them for not doing what he says, he starts swinging his walking stick at everybody. These, in their turn, cursed back at the blind miscreant, threatened him in horrid terms, and tried in vain to catch the stick and wrest it from his grasp. This quarrel was the saving of us, for while it was still raging, another sound came from the top of the hill on the side of the hamlet, the tramp of horses galloping. Almost at the same time, a pistol shot, flash and report, came from the hedge side, and that was plainly the last signal of danger, for the buccaneers turned at once and ran, separating in every direction, one seaward along the cove, one slant across the hill, and so on, so that in half a minute not a sign of them remained but Pew. Him they had deserted. Whether in sheer panic or out of revenge for his ill words and blows, I know not, but there he remained behind, tapping up and down the road in a frenzy, and groping and calling for his comrades. Finally, he took a wrong turn and ran a few steps past me towards the hamlet, crying, "Johnny, Black Dog, Dirk," and other names. "You won't leave old Pew, mates, not old Pew." Okay, so there was a sound of gunshot, and that was the last warning, and all the pirates scattered, leaving Pew behind, because he'd been throwing a fit and hitting everybody and all that. They just left him there. Nobody held on to him. Okay, and now he's calling out and saying, "You're not going to leave me here, are you?" Just then the noise of the horses topped the rise, and 4 or 5 riders came in sight in the moonlight and swept at full gallop down the slope. At this, Pew saw his error, turned with a scream, and ran straight for the ditch into which he rolled. But he was on his feet again in a second and made another dash, now utterly bewildered, right under the nearest of the coming horses. The rider tried to save him, but in vain. Down went Pew with a cry that rang high into the night, and the 4 hoofs trampled and spurned him and passed by. He fell on his side, and then gently collapsed upon his face and moved no more. I leaped to my feet and hailed the riders. They were pulling up at any rate, horrified at the accident, and I soon saw what they were. One, tailing out behind the rest, was a lad that had gone from the hamlet to Dr. Livesey's. The rest were revenue officers, basically police officers, whom he had met. They're not really, they work for the government, but think of it that way, whom he had met by the way, and with whom he had the intelligence to return at once. Some news of the lugger, the boat, in Kit's Hole had found its way to Supervisor Dance and set him forth that night in our direction. And to that circumstance, my mother and I owed our preservation from death. Okay, so let me explain again. Supervisor Dance, that's the guy's last name, like Captain Dance or something like that, is a revenue officer. And he had heard that there was a boat in a place called Kit's Hole, basically an unauthorized boat, probably smugglers, people moving goods without permission. And so a revenue officer would be going to check on them and seeing if they had the right permits and maybe arresting people or whatever. So they'd heard of that and they were on their way. And so the person who had gone to go get Dr. Livesey had run into them and thought, hey, you guys come with us right away. Something's going down. And so that was lucky and it saved their lives. Okay, so let's continue. Pugh was dead, stone dead. As for my mother, when we had carried her up to the hamlet, a little cold water and salts, and that soon brought her back again. And she was none the worse for her terror, though she still continued to deplore the balance of the money. In the meantime, the supervisor rode on as fast as he could to Kit's Hole, but his men had to dismount and grope down the dingle, leading and sometimes supporting their horses, and in continual fear of ambushes. So it was no great matter for surprise that when they got down to the hole, the lugger was already underway, though still close in. He hailed her, a voice replied, telling him to keep out of the moonlight or he would get some lead in him, and at the same time a bullet whistled close by his arm. Soon after, the lugger doubled the point and disappeared. Mr. Dance stood there, as he said, like a fish out of water, and all he could do was to dispatch a man to B, that's the B that begins a word that we don't know what it is, another town, maybe Bristol, to warn the cutter. And that, said he, is just about as good as nothing. They've got off clean, and there's an end. Only, he added, I'm glad I trod on Master Pugh's corns, for by this time he had heard my story. Okay, so they had tried to stop the pirates or smugglers before they got out of the cove. But when they got there, they were already on their way, so they weren't able to do it. Okay. I went back with him to the Admiral Benbow, and you cannot imagine a house in such a state of smash. The very clock had been thrown down by these fellows in their furious hunt after my mother and myself, and though nothing had actually been taken away except the captain's money bag and a little silver from the till, I could see at once that we were ruined. Mr. Dance could make nothing of the scene. They got the money, you say? Well, then, Hawkins, what in fortune were they after? More money, I suppose? No, sir, not money, I think, replied I. In fact, sir, I believe I have the thing in my breast pocket, and, to tell you the truth, I should like to get it put in safety. To be sure, boy, quite right, said he. I'll take it if you like. I thought perhaps Dr. Livesey, I began. Perfectly right, he interrupted very cheerily. Perfectly right. A gentleman and a magistrate. And now I come to think of it, I might as well ride round there myself and report to him or squire. Master Pugh's dead when all's done, not that I regret it, but he's dead, you see, and people will make it out against an officer of His Majesty's revenue if make it out they can. Now I'll tell you, Hawkins, if you like, I'll take you along. I thanked him heartily for the offer, and we walked back to the hamlet where the horses were. By the time I had told Mother of my purpose, they were all in the saddle. Dogger, said Mr. Dance, talking to one of the other officers, you have a good horse. Take up this lad behind you. As soon as I was mounted, holding on to Dogger's belt, the supervisor gave the word, and the party struck out at a bouncing trot on the road to Dr. Livesey's house. So the officer, named Dance, offered to take the packet that Jim is assuming the folks were coming to get. They wanted it. They were looking for it. They called it Flint's Fist. Remember that. And when Dance hears about it, he's like, well, you want me to take it? And Jim's being careful. He's like, I think I should give it to Dr. Livesey. You know, and Dance is like, yeah, okay. And he's a magistrate. That makes sense. Okay. All right, I'll take you there. I got to go and report this death anyway. So come on, you can ride with us. And so that's what they're going to do. All right, so go to your notes sheet and write your summary. This is an action-packed chapter. It's one of my favorite ones, the first part, I guess. I mean, it's kind of bad. A guy gets trampled by horses. But it's intense because it starts out where they're hiding and they see the pirates come in. They search their house. And they didn't get very far. They left the door open. They left a candle burning up in the room. And so the pirates know they're right there. And if things hadn't happened the way they had, they would have found them. But it turns out that those officers were on the road and got called up to come and interrupt it. And so that's how Pugh ended up trampled, and how Officer Dance or Supervisor Dance and his buddies came kind of to save the day. So now at the end of this chapter. Jim is on the back of one of the horses with the officers on his way to see the doctor. Okay. All right. So do your summary. Then you also want to write about what you think will happen next after this. Okay. And then you're going to want to analyze a little bit of what you think the author is up to in this particular section. What is he trying to accomplish? And once you've done that, you're going to write about what you liked the most about this chapter. Was it the trampling death? Was it the rescue? Was it, what was it that you liked the best about it? And then what do you wonder about? Like, what's a Flint's fist? Who's this Flint guy? Seriously, what's going on with that? And then you need to write about something that was difficult. And I would think that some things would be difficult here. Again, go back and look at the language, find things you didn't know, and make sure that you now will know them. On the back of that page, you're going to write 3 of those vocabulary words and define them. And try to pick ones you don't know. Try to pick ones that you think are interesting. And then down the road, one day, they might even be words that you can use. And write down 3 characters and what they accomplish or what they do during this particular chapter. Probably Pew, the blind man, should be one. I mean, this is his last chapter. And Jim should be one. After that, I guess you could choose the mom or maybe Supervisor Dance. Either one of those would have something you could write. Okay. One way or another, you're wanting to keep this in your mind and make it easy for you to look back at these notes so that you could retell what happened in the story. And then you're going to draw a picture. And I think a lot of people choose to draw what happened to Pew if they can, but that can be a little complicated. Horses aren't easy to draw sometimes for people. So think about what else would signify, what else would make you think about what happened in this chapter. Okay. And that's it for chapter 5. We will continue next with the conclusion to part 1 in chapter 6.